the neighbor's light. You ever notice how certain things just don't feel right? You can't explain why, but deep down you know something is wrong? Yeah, that's how this all started for me. I moved into this duplex about 6 months ago. Quiet street, nice neighbors, or so I thought. It was exactly what I needed after my last breakup, a fresh start. The place had a bit of charm to it, you know? A small, fenced in yard, hardwood floors, and an attic I didn't think I'd ever use. Perfect for someone like me who just wanted to be left alone. The first few months were fine. The woman who lived in the other half of the duplex kept to herself. Her name was, Elaine, I think. Mid-50s, a little eccentric but friendly enough. She had this habit of leaving a single light on in her upstairs window every night. I'd see it glowing faintly through the thin curtains when I pulled into my driveway. I never thought much of it. People have quirks, right? But one night, about a month ago, I noticed the light was off. I only noticed because I'd gotten so used to it being on. I thought, maybe she finally remembered to turn it off. The next night, though, it was still off, and the night after that. I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe she'd gone on vacation or something. But then I started hearing noises. Not loud, obvious noises, just odd little sounds, like faint scratching or tapping, always coming from her side of the house. It would start around midnight, just when I was starting to drift off to sleep. Scratch. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I assumed it was the wind or maybe an animal. But then, one night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it again. Scrap. Tap, tap, tap. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It was coming from the wall. The wall that separated our units. Now look, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but it was weird. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out what it was. It sounded deliberate, like someone lightly scratching at the paint. I called out, "Elaine, you okay?" No answer. Just more scratching. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I decided to check on her. I knocked on her front door, but there was no response. The curtains were drawn tight and everything looked still. Too still. I thought about calling the landlord, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe she was sick or had gone to stay with family, so I tried to let it go. But that night, the noises came back. Louder this time. Scratch, scratch, tap, tap, tap. I banged on the wall. "Elaine, enough already." And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I swear it felt like the house was holding its breath. The next day, I saw the landlord in the yard. I asked if he'd heard from Elaine recently. He gave me this puzzled look and said, "Elaine? Oh no, she moved out a couple of weeks ago. Didn't I tell you?" My stomach dropped. Moved out? When? About a week before you moved in. Place has been empty ever since. I tried to laugh it off, but my mind was racing. If Elaine wasn't there, then who or what was making those noises? I decided to do a little investigating. That evening, I waited until dark, then grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. I walked around to the side of the house where Elaine's window was. The upstairs light was still off. The whole place looked abandoned. Dusty windows, no sign of life. But then I saw it. On the window pane, there were streaks, smudges, like someone had been pressing their hands or their face against the glass. I shone my flashlight up at the window, and I swear to God, I saw something move. Just for a split second. I ran back inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I kept telling myself, "It's nothing. You're imagining things. You're tired." But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Why didn't you stay?" I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, but how would they know? I hadn't told anyone about what was happening. I didn't reply. I didn't want to engage. But the texts kept coming. "I see you. You're not alone. Stay with me." I tried to block the number, but the messages wouldn't stop. Each one was worse than the last. They described things, details about my apartment, about me, that no one should have known. That night, I barely slept. When I finally dozed off, I had the worst dream. I was in Elaine's unit, standing in the dark. The air was thick, and I could barely breathe. Then I felt it, something cold brushing against my neck. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. But the shadows weren't empty. They were watching. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, and the first thing I noticed, my bedroom window was open, wide open. I live on the second floor. I don't know what's in that other unit or what it wants, but I can't stay here anymore. Every night, the noises get louder, the shadows feel closer, and the texts, they've stopped asking me to stay. Now they're saying something else. Come upstairs. The Lake's Whisper. You know how people always talk about those perfect summer nights? The ones where the air is warm, the breeze smells like pine, and the world feels calm? Yeah, that's how this started. It was one of those nights. I was camping by myself at Echo Lake, a place I'd gone to every summer since I was a kid. It's remote, no cell service, no electricity, just a small lake surrounded by towering pines. My parents used to call it our little slice of heaven. This time, though, it didn't feel like heaven. It felt off. I had arrived late in the afternoon and pitched my tent by the shore, like always. The lake was calm, the surface like a mirror reflecting the fading sunlight. I should have felt at peace, but there was this strange weight in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. After setting up camp, I built a small fire and sat there, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, normal stuff. But as the sun disappeared and the stars came out, I started to notice something. The forest wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. Too quiet. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. I doused the fire, zipped myself into the tent, and laid there, staring at the nylon ceiling. That's when I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was low, almost too faint to hear, but it was there. Words I couldn't make out, carried on a soft breeze. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. The whispering grew louder, like it was circling my tent. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, hissing things I couldn't understand. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The whispering stopped. Dead silence. I told myself it was my imagination, probably just the wind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through the trees, revealing nothing but shadows. I was about to go back inside when I noticed something on the shore. Footprints, barefoot, leading from the water's edge straight toward my tent. Now, here's the thing. I hadn't gone into the lake. Those prints weren't mine, and they weren't there when I set up camp. My heart started pounding as I followed them with the flashlight. They stopped just a few feet from my tent, then disappeared, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. I backed away, my hands shaking, and climbed into the tent. I zipped it up tight and sat there, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon. That's when I heard it again. The whispering. Spurring. This time, it was louder, clearer. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the lake. I scrambled out of the tent, shining my flashlight toward the water. The surface, so calm before, was now rippling gently, like something was moving beneath it. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing across the lake. No answer. Just ripples. Then I saw them. Pale, thin hands reaching up from the water's surface, clawing at the air. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, falling into the dirt. The hands vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving the water still once more. I should have packed up right then and there. Driven away, left everything behind, but I couldn't move. It was like the forest itself was holding me in place, waiting for something. I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire pit, watching the lake, jumping at every sound. The whispering came and went, always just out of reach, like a bad dream you can't wake up from. When dawn finally broke, I felt a tiny sliver of relief. The sunlight made everything feel less sinister. I decided I'd pack up and leave, but first I needed to see the lake in daylight. I don't know why. It felt like I had to. As I walked to the shore, I noticed something in the sand. It wasn't just footprints anymore. It was writing. Words scrawled in long, looping letters like they'd been scratched into the earth with a claw. "Stay with us." I froze. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I stood there, staring at the message when I heard it. A laugh. High-pitched, childlike, but wrong. It came from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. There was no one there. The whispering started again, louder now, surrounding me. I stumbled backward, my eyes darting around the empty campsite. Shadows shifted in the trees, moving in ways they shouldn't. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the lake. It was tall and gaunt, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless surface where its eyes and mouth should have been. It raised a hand, beckoning me. I don't remember running. I don't remember grabbing my keys or starting the car. The next thing I knew, I was speeding down the dirt road, the lake disappearing in my rearview mirror. When I got home, I told myself it was over. I'd never go back. But last night, I found something that made my blood run cold. A message scratched into the dirt outside my apartment. You left too soon. The neighbor upstairs. You know how sometimes you can just tell when something isn't quite right? It's that prickly feeling on the back of your neck, like someone's watching, even though you're alone. That's how it started for me. Just a feeling. It was a Tuesday night, and I was curled up on the couch binging some crime documentary. My apartment complex is pretty old, thin walls, creaky floors, the works. Normally, I'd hear my upstairs neighbor stomping around like they were rearranging furniture every night. But that night, silence. It should have been a relief, honestly. But instead, it felt wrong. I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe they were out of town or something. Still, I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my chest. It wasn't until I heard the first sound that I realized how tense I'd been. It started as a soft tap, 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 like someone drumming their fingers on a table. It came from directly above me, faint but rhythmic. I paused the TV, listening. The tapping stopped. Figures, I muttered to myself. Probably just the neighbor. But the second I unpaused the show, it started again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. I muted the TV and stared at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the sound. Hello? I called out, feeling kind of stupid. The tapping stopped again, but now I could hear something else. A faint scraping like, I don't know, like nails dragging across wood. My heart started racing. I told myself it was nothing, just some old pipes or maybe the neighbor moving furniture again, but deep down, I knew it wasn't the pipes. I grabbed the broom from the corner and gave the ceiling a solid whack. Knock it off, I shouted. Silence. I was about to sit back down when I heard it. A laugh. It wasn't loud, just a quiet, breathy giggle that sent a chill crawling up my spine. It didn't sound like my neighbor. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. I stood there, broom in hand, listening, but the sound was gone. My rational brain kept trying to convince me it was nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the sound carried from another apartment. That's what I told myself anyway. But then the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth above me. I looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Too late for someone to be stomping around like that. I decided to head upstairs and say something. I wasn't trying to be a jerk, but come on. It was late and I had work in the morning. So I threw on some shoes, grabbed my phone, and made my way to the third floor. Their door was at the end of the hallway. Apartment 3B. I stood there for a second, feeling oddly nervous. It's just a neighbor, I told myself. Nothing weird. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Hey, you're being kind of loud down there. I called through the door. Still nothing. That's when I noticed something strange. The door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open just enough to see into the dark apartment. I should have walked away, I know that now. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello? I called, pushing the door open a little wider. The hinges creaked like something out of a horror movie. The apartment was dark, except for a faint glow coming from the living room, a TV playing static. Hello? I called again, stepping inside. The place smelled wrong, like mildew and something metallic, almost like blood. The air was heavy, stifling. I tried to ignore the goosebumps prickling my arms as I moved toward the living room. That's when I saw it. A chair in the middle of the room, facing the TV. And sitting in the chair wasn't my neighbor. It was a figure, hunched and impossibly thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, its head tilted at an unnatural angle like it was listening to the static. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, then it turned its head toward me. Its face was all wrong. Hollow eyes, a gaping mouth that stretched far too wide, like it was trying to scream, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, hitting the door frame. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. That's when the figure moved. It stood slowly, jerking like a broken puppet, its hollow eyes locked on me. I don't remember running. I think my body just took over. The next thing I knew, I was back in my apartment, locking the door behind me and gasping for breath. But it didn't end there. The footsteps started again, this time right above my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. And then that laugh. Low, breathy, and impossibly close. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my living room, clutching a knife, watching the ceiling until the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds. The weird part? The next morning, I went to the building manager to complain about my upstairs neighbor. You know what he said? There's no one in 3B. That apartment's been empty for 6 months. The lake house haunting. You know, I've never really believed in ghosts, not until last summer. I guess I always thought that stuff was made up, campfire stories to scare kids or excuses for people's bad decisions. But what happened at the lake house, it changed everything. So, it started pretty innocently. My sister Claire had invited me to this old family lake house she'd just inherited. It belonged to some distant aunt we barely remembered. The place was a bit of a fixer-upper, peeling paint, sagging roof, you get the picture. But it was secluded and quiet, and Claire thought we could make a little getaway out of it. Come on, she said over the phone. It'll be fun. Just us, some wine, and the lake. We could use the break. She wasn't wrong. Work had been stressful and I needed some peace. So I packed up my stuff, grabbed a book, and drove up there. It was only a couple of hours away. The house was smaller than I imagined, sitting right on the edge of the lake. The water was calm, almost too calm, like glass. The trees around it were so thick they felt like a wall. Claire was already there when I arrived, waving from the porch. "Isn't it cute?" she said, grinning as she hugged me. "Sure," I lied. It wasn't cute. It was creepy. But I didn't want to kill her vibe. We spent the first day cleaning and catching up. By the evening, we were sitting on the porch, sipping wine and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The lake reflected the fiery orange sky, and for a moment I thought maybe this place wasn't so bad. But then night fell. It started with a sound. We were inside by then, playing cards in the dim living room. The place didn't have great electricity, so the lamps were weak, casting long shadows on the walls. That's when I heard it. A faint plop, like something dropped into the lake. "You hear that?" I asked. Claire nodded, frowning. "Probably just a fish." I wanted to agree, but it didn't sound like a fish. It was too deliberate, like something heavy had fallen into the water. I shook it off and went back to the game. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was Claire talking under her breath, but when I looked up, her face was pale, her eyes darting around the room. "Did you say something?" she asked. "No. Did you?" We both sat there, frozen, listening. The whispers were faint, almost indistinct, but they were definitely coming from inside the house. I tried to rationalize it, maybe the wind through the old walls, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like words. We grabbed a flashlight and started looking around. The air felt heavier, like the house was watching us. We checked every room, but nothing seemed out of place. "Probably just our imagination," Claire said, though her voice trembled. I nodded, pretending to believe her. We went back to the living room, but the atmosphere had shifted. The house felt different, like it wasn't empty anymore. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. My room was upstairs, overlooking the lake. Claire's was downstairs. As I climbed the creaky staircase, I felt weird, like something was behind me. I turned around, shining the flashlight down the hall. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I locked my bedroom door and got into bed, hoping to sleep off the unease. But sleep didn't come. I kept hearing noises, scraping sounds like nails against wood and soft taps on the window. The whispers were louder now, just outside my door. I lay there, clutching the blanket, too scared to move. And then the door handle turned. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The lock held, but the handle jiggled violently like someone was trying to get in. Scrambled for my phone to call Claire, but I had no signal. "Claire?" I shouted. "Is that you?" No answer. The handle stopped moving, but now there were footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing outside my room. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, but eventually the noises stopped, the whispers faded, the footsteps were gone. In the morning, I found Claire in the kitchen, her face pale. "Did you hear it?" she asked. "Yeah," I whispered. I think we should leave." She nodded. We packed in silence. trying to avoid looking at the shadows on the walls or the lake outside. But as we were loading the car, Claire stopped, staring at something in the water. "Do you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything, just the calm surface of the lake. But then, a pale face broke the water, staring back at us. We didn't wait to see more. We jumped in the car and sped off, leaving the lake house behind. Here's the thing, though. A week later, Claire called me. She'd gone back to the house to get some of her things. She said it felt different this time, less oppressive. But she found something strange in the living room. An old photograph tucked under the couch. It was a picture of two little girls standing by the lake. One of them looked like Claire. The other didn't, and scrawled on the back in faded handwriting were the words, "Don't leave me again." The neighbor. You ever think you know someone, like really know them, and then something happens that flips your whole perspective? That's how I felt about Mr. Hendricks. He was my neighbor for years. Quiet guy, lived alone, kept to himself. I'd wave at him when I saw him mowing his lawn or taking out the trash. He'd always wave back, but we never really talked. That changed one night about a month ago. It started with a knock. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was on my couch, binge watching some show I can't even remember now. The knock was soft at first, like whoever it was didn't want to disturb me. Tap, tap, tap. I muted the TV and listened. Maybe I imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. When I opened the door, there he was, Mr. Hendricks. His face was pale, his eyes wide, darting around like he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. He was clutching a flashlight in one hand, and his other hand trembled as it gripped the doorframe. "Mr. Hendricks? Are you okay?" He leaned in, his voice low. "Can I come in? Just for a minute." Now, normally I'd say no. I mean, we weren't friends or anything, but there was something about the way he looked like he was genuinely scared. So I stepped aside and let him in. He stood in the middle of my living room, looking around like he expected someone or something to follow him. "I didn't know where else to go," he muttered. "Why? What's going on?" He hesitated, licking his lips. Have you seen anything strange tonight?" I frowned. "Strange how?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the window and peered out, pulling the curtain back just an inch. "Mr. Hendricks, you're freaking me out. What's going on?" He turned to me, and I swear his face was even paler now. It's in my house." I laughed nervously. "What's in your house?" "I don't know," he said, "but I hear it. Moving around, whispering." I froze. "Whispering? Are you sure? Maybe it's just the wind or—" "No," his voice was sharp. "It's not the wind, it's something else." I didn't know what to say. He looked so certain, but at the same time he sounded crazy. "Did you call the police?" I asked. He shook his head. "They won't believe me. I wouldn't believe me, but it's there." For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "It's been watching me." "What do you mean, watching you?" He hesitated, then whispered, "It knows my name." I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, the lights flickered. We both froze, staring at the overhead bulb as it buzzed and dimmed. For a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. Then the light came back on, but it felt weaker somehow, like it was struggling to stay lit. Mr. Hendricks gripped my arm. "It's here." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off his hand. "Okay, look, I think maybe you just need some sleep." Before I could finish, there was a sound, a soft, rhythmic thud, thud, thud coming from the ceiling. We both looked up. "What is that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. The sound grew louder, moving across the ceiling. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate. "Do you have an attic?" he asked. "No." His face went white. The footsteps stopped directly above us. "Stay here," I said, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to convince myself I wasn't scared. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and started toward the stairs. "Wait," Mr. Hendricks said. "Don't go alone." I ignored him. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed. The air felt colder up there, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. When I reached the top, I looked around. Nothing. But then I saw it. A shadow. It darted across the hallway, just out of the corner of my eye. "Hello," I called out. No response. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The floorboards groaned under my feet. I gripped the bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat, and then I heard it. Whispering. Soft, almost too faint to make out, but it was there, coming from the end of the hall. I took another step, then another, until I reached the door to the guest bedroom. The whispering was louder now, but I couldn't make out the words. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could turn it, the door swung open. There was no one there. The room was empty, but the whispering didn't stop. It was louder now, surrounding me, filling my head. I turned in a circle, my eyes darting around the room, and then I saw it. The mirror. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't me. The thing in the mirror was smiling. Its lips moved, whispering words I couldn't understand. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't look away. I stumbled back, dropping the bat. The whispering grew louder, turning into a roar. "Leave," it hissed. I ran. When I got back downstairs, Mr. Hendricks was gone. The front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. I never saw him again after that night. His house has been dark ever since, the curtains drawn, the lawn overgrown. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers coming through the walls, and when I look in the mirror, I swear something's looking back. Did you hear that? The lake house. You ever feel like you've walked into something you shouldn't have? Like the air itself is trying to tell you to leave? That's what happened to me when I visited the lake house. It started out simple. My buddy Greg had invited me to crash there for the weekend. His family owned this old property by a lake, way out in the woods. He couldn't make it, but he said, "Hey, you can still use the place. Great for unwinding." I thought, why not? A quiet weekend alone sounded perfect. I wish I'd stayed home. The drive out there was uneventful. Long, winding roads cutting through thick trees. The house was old but charming in a rustic way. It had a wraparound porch, a view of the lake, and an eerie stillness that I figured was just part of being in the middle of nowhere. I settled in, unpacked a few things, and made myself comfortable. The first night was uneventful, just me, a crackling fireplace, and the sound of crickets outside. But the next day, things started feeling off. It began with the lake. I went for a morning walk down to the shore. The water was calm, perfectly still, almost like glass. But as I stood there, I noticed something strange. There were no birds, no fish jumping, no ripples on the water's surface, just silence. I felt a chill, like someone was watching me. I turned around expecting to see another hiker or maybe a stray dog, but no one was there. The feeling followed me back to the house. All day, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners of my vision, only to disappear when I looked directly at them. I told myself I was just imagining things. Being out here alone was messing with my head. But that night, that's when it got worse. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. Whispering. It was faint, almost like the wind, but it had a rhythm. Words, though I couldn't make them out. I sat up, straining to hear. It sounded like it was coming from outside. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just the porch, the trees, and the black, unmoving lake beyond. "Hello?" I called out. The whispering stopped. I should have packed up and left right then, but no, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind really did carry some strange sound from across the lake. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next day I found footprints. They were faint, pressed into the dirt around the house. Too small to be mine, too big for an animal. I followed them, flashlight in hand, until they vanished near the edge of the trees. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. I didn't go back to the lake after that. Instead, I stayed in the house, locking the doors and closing the curtains. The daylight felt like a false sense of security. The whispering came again that night. This time, it wasn't outside. It was inside. I woke up to the sound of soft murmurs, like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. I grabbed the flashlight again, the beam trembling as I pointed it toward the door. "Who's there?" The whispering stopped. Then the doorknob turned. I froze. The knob twisted slowly, creaking as it moved, but the door didn't open. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knob stopped turning, and the whispering came back, this time louder. It sounded like it was right outside the door. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I yanked the door open. No one was there, but the hall wasn't empty. There were wet footprints on the floor leading from the stairs to my room. They stopped right where I was standing. I barely slept after that. I sat in the corner of the room, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The whispering came and went throughout the night. Sometimes it was close, sometimes it was distant, but I never saw anyone. By morning, I was done. I packed my things, ready to get the hell out of there. But as I opened the front door, I stopped. There was something carved into the wood on the inside of the door. 4 words scratched deep into the surface. Don't let it in. I left everything behind. Clothes, bags, everything. I just ran to my car, heart racing, expecting to hear footsteps chasing me. But when I looked back, the house was just there, silent. I never told Greg what happened. I never went back. But sometimes late at night, I hear whispering. And when I look out my window, I swear I can see wet footprints leading away from the lake.
Did you hear that too?
The neighbor. You ever get the feeling someone's watching you? Not just in passing, but constantly. Like a pair of unseen eyes following your every move. Yeah, I used to think that was paranoia too, until last fall. It all started when I moved into that little house on Oak Hollow Road. Cute place, small yard, just enough space for me to feel like an adult. It was quiet too, no kids screaming, no dogs barking, just me and the occasional hum of cars passing by. The house next door, though, was odd. It looked fine from the outside, fresh paint, tidy lawn, but I never saw anyone come or go. Not once. A week after I moved in, I noticed the curtains in one of the upstairs windows were always drawn back, just a crack. It didn't seem like much at first. I figured maybe someone lived there who didn't like visitors. But one night I was up late working on some freelance stuff in the living room. I glanced toward the neighbor's house and I saw it. That curtain moved, just a little, like someone was standing behind it. I waved, kind of awkwardly. Hey, I'm friendly wave. No response. The next day I decided to introduce myself. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do. I knocked on their front door and waited. And waited. Nothing. I was about to leave when I thought I heard something, like a faint shuffling inside. Hello? I called out. No answer, just silence. That night, the feeling started. I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom window cracked open for some fresh air. When I felt it, a prickling on the back of my neck, I glanced toward the window, and there it was again. That curtain. It shifted, just enough for me to see a shadowy figure standing behind it. This time, I didn't wave. The next few nights were uneasy. Every time I walked past a window, I felt like I was being watched. Then came the phone calls. The first one was at 2 a.m. I groggily picked up my phone, expecting it to be a wrong number. Hello? No answer. Just a faint, rhythmic static. I hung up and went back to bed, but the calls kept coming. Always late, always silent, except for that strange, pulsating static. One evening, after the 5th call that week, I decided to block the number. But when I picked up to do it, I heard something. A whisper. It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but I swear I heard it. My name. By now, I was done. I called the landlord and asked about the house next door. He seemed confused. That place, it's been empty for years. Last tenant moved out in, 2015? Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaky. Because I've seen someone there. There was a long pause. Then he said, You've got the wrong place. There's no one living there. That night, I locked every door, every window. I tried to convince myself the landlord was wrong, that someone was living there. Maybe they were just a recluse, right? But deep down, I knew. I knew something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, pacing back and forth outside my bedroom window. I froze, heart pounding. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear anything. That's when I heard the faint scrape of metal on glass. Something was trying to open the window. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about an intruder. But when the cops arrived, there was no one there. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing. The next morning, I noticed something new. In the dirt outside my window, there was a single handprint, too large to be human. And in my mailbox, a note. 4 words scrawled in shaky, jagged letters. You're not alone anymore. I moved out the next day, left everything behind, but sometimes late at night, I still feel it, that prickling on the back of my neck. And when I look out my window, I swear I see a curtain drawn back just a crack and something watching me from the dark. Night shift. Have you ever worked a graveyard shift? The kind where the silence feels alive, like the building itself is breathing? I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. It started last month when I took a night job as a security guard at the old Mercer building downtown. Nothing fancy, just sit in the lobby, watch some monitors, and make rounds every hour. Easy money, right? The building was empty, no tenants, no offices, just a skeleton of what it used to be. They were planning renovations, but for now, it was just me and 4 floors of silence. The first few nights were uneventful. The monitors showed static corridors, darkened offices, and the occasional rat scurrying across the floor. Then came Thursday. I was halfway through my second round, walking the 3rd floor, when I noticed it. A door at the end of the hallway slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it earlier, and I knew I'd checked all the doors. My job depended on it. I hesitated, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Hello? Anyone here? My voice echoed down the empty hallway. Nothing. I walked toward the door, my footsteps too loud in the stillness. The plaque on the door read, Conference Room B. I pushed it open. The room was empty, just a long table, mismatched chairs, and a single window overlooking the street below. But something felt wrong. The air was heavy, like it didn't want me there. And then I saw it. On the window pane, drawn in the condensation from the cold night, was a single handprint. Too large to be mine. I locked the door and hurried back to the lobby, trying to convince myself I'd just missed it earlier. Maybe some old tenant had left it. Yeah, that had to be it. But then, on the monitor, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The camera for the 3rd floor hallway flickered, and for a split second, I swear I saw a shadow move across the screen. I spent the next few hours glued to the monitors, my rounds forgotten. The building was silent, but every now and then I thought I heard whispers. It wasn't words, exactly, just the soft rise and fall of something too faint to make out. I kept checking the cameras, but nothing moved. At least, not while I was looking. Around 3 a.m., the elevator dinged. I nearly jumped out of my chair. The lobby was empty, and no one had pressed the button. The building was supposed to be locked. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing nothing but the dimly lit interior. I stared at it, waiting for I don't know what. Then the doors closed again. I told myself it was a glitch, some electrical issue in the old system, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I decided to do one last round before my shift ended. Big mistake. When I reached the 3rd floor, I saw it immediately. The door to conference room B was open again, and this time, the handprint on the window had moved. It wasn't just smeared, it was lower, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass and slowly dragged it down. My flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Is anyone here? I called out, my voice shaking, and then I heard it. A faint, almost playful whisper. Come in. I should have left. I should have run. But something about the voice, it didn't feel threatening. It felt familiar. I stepped into the room, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The air was freezing, and the heavy silence pressed against my ears. And then I saw it. In the reflection of the window, standing behind me, was a figure. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, circling me, laughing, crying, screaming all at once. And then the lights went out. I don't remember much after that. The morning guard found me huddled in the lobby, muttering nonsense. He said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I quit the next day, but sometimes late at night, I still hear those whispers, and when I close my eyes, I see the handprint sliding down the glass, and that figure standing just behind me. The neighbor. You know that feeling when you realize you don't know someone as well as you thought? Like when a friendly smile hides something off? Yeah, that's what happened with Mr. Pearson. He moved into the house next door a few months ago. Quiet guy, late 50s maybe, always dressed neat, like someone's idea of a perfect suburban dad. He waved every morning as I left for work, sometimes even helped me bring in groceries. Seemed normal. Until last week. It started on Tuesday. I was watering my plants out front when I noticed him standing at his window, staring at me. Not in a casual way either. His face was pressed close to the glass, eyes locked on me, unblinking. I smiled awkwardly and waved. He didn't move. After a few seconds, I turned back to my plants, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. When I glanced back, he was gone. The next day, I heard knocking. Not on my door. It was faint, like it was coming from inside my house.
Knock, knock.
I checked every room, even the basement. Nothing. I was about to chalk it up to pipes or my imagination when I heard it again. Knock, knock. This time, it was louder. It sounded like it came from the wall I shared with Mr. Pearson's house. I pressed my ear to the wall, my frowning for a moment. I thought I heard something, a muffled voice, a scratch. But then it stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. Thursday, things got worse. I came home late, and as I walked up to my door, I saw him. Mr. Pearson was sitting on his porch in the dark, staring straight ahead. No light, no movement, just him, like some creepy statue. "Good evening," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should check your back door." My stomach dropped. Who would send that? I crept downstairs, every creak of the floorboards making my pulse race. When I reached the kitchen, I froze. The back door was wide open. I grabbed a knife and searched every corner of the house, but no one was there. The only thing I found was a muddy footprint by the door, and then I saw it on the counter. A note, written in shaky handwriting, "He's watching you." The police didn't take me seriously when I called. They said it was probably a prank or maybe even a break-in. "Keep your doors locked," they said. "We'll patrol the area." Helpful. I decided to confront Mr. Pearson the next morning. When I knocked on his door, he didn't answer. The shades were drawn and the house was eerily silent. After a minute, I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. In the small gap between the curtains, I saw a figure standing in the hallway. I called his name, but the figure didn't move. And then it waved. Not a friendly wave, a slow, deliberate motion. I ran back to my house, locking every door and window. That night, I heard the knocking again. This time it was louder, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the wall. No, it was coming from inside the wall. I pressed my ear to it, and I swear I heard whispering. "Let me out." The knocking stopped around dawn. Exhausted, I decided to peek outside. Mr. Pearson's house was swarming with police cars. I went over, my curiosity overpowering my fear. One of the officers stopped me. "Did you know him?" "Sort of," I said. "What happened?" The officer hesitated, then lowered his voice. "We got a call about a disturbance. Found him dead in the basement. Been there for weeks, maybe months." My blood ran cold. "That's not possible. I just saw him yesterday." The officer gave me a strange look. "You couldn't have napped. He'd been walled up behind a false panel. Whoever did it left a note, though." I swallowed hard. "What did it say?" The officer's face darkened. "You're next." And now the knocking started again, inside my walls.